So in this video, we're going to take a look at the accounts and the stories that are associated with the kind of calling of Abram, Abraham, and the events that kind of lead up to the birth of the covenant son, who is Isaac. So when we open up into Genesis chapter 12, one of the things that we're seeing here is we're seeing how God is answering the problem of human wickedness, human sin, by calling on forming a particular people to address that problem, the way in which the world has become corrupted. So we've seen a long history of humans rebelling against God's will for humans to flourish. So that was God's original intent for society, for human beings, to live in partnership with each other, as illustrated in the relationship between Adam and Eve, to fill the earth, to subdue it, to reign over it. They are image bearers of God. They are creators. They exercise sovereignty, just like God is a creator and exercises sovereignty. They are to multiply and spread, as it were, across creation with the work that they have to do, but all that gets corrupted, and they are banished from the Eden, this kind of idyllic place where they did not have the worries that would come upon them, which is sweat with work, pain, threat of pain, even death with the birth of children, this enmity with the serpent. And so the world in which they're now cast into is an unpleasant world. The safety of the garden has been removed. And then there just follows a pattern of human beings rebelling against how God wants humans to flourish. So we see Cain killing his brothers. We have a story, an allusion to an event where Lamech has also killed someone. So we have murder that is taking place. And we also have kind of the development of culture with different descendants being attributed to being the kind of the beginner of different activities. Of course, all this moves into when we get to the period of Noah. And so with Noah as well, there's a great deal of wickedness all over the world. God wants to kind of hit the reset button, and but he's going to save or set aside Noah and his family because they are righteous, and kind of restart. But no sooner have they gotten off the boat, but then once again we have some other kind of problem that takes place. Sin again begins to happen, even with Noah himself, where he's, kind of the beginning of, he's a vineyard. He takes care of wine, grapes, but he becomes drunk off of what he's supposed to take care of. And so we just see this pattern of behavior in the story of Babel, where they try to build a tower to make a name for themselves, a status, gather everybody into a city, although you're supposed to scatter throughout the earth. And so, once again, God punishes people who seek to become something other than what he has intended them to be. They want to get their status from building this high building, but that's not where their status comes from. Their status comes from being the image bearers of God, cultivating the earth, subduing it, but instead they want to build these towers and make names for themselves. So all this, it leads up to God calling Abram. That's his name, meaning exalted ancestor. And he tells him to leave his father's household, quite an unconventional thing. Usually it's you stay with your family, but here to leave that household, to leave one's kind of country, region, and go where God will show him. So in other words, for Abram to then trust God to take him where he needs to go. So God plans to bless the earth through Abraham and his descendants. So this is what's kind of laid out to Abram for why he's going to leave what was comfortable for him or what was known to him, his father's household, and go to this foreign place, this new place. But there's going to be stages or steps. The first step is going to be God is going to bless Abram and made from him a great nation. So this idea that a nation is going to be made from Abram, but also God is going to bless all nations. So this is not a relationship where God only relates with Abram and his descendants, but God is also going to relate with all the nations. He's not giving up on all the nations. But it is through Abram's family, through his descendants, that all the rest of the nations shall be blessed. And so these two steps are a part of this process of choosing Abraham, and his descendants through a particular line. So we get in the Genesis that follows this kind of call of Abram's pattern of behavior. So he's going to build an ark and he's going to invoke the name of the Lord. And we see the capitalization of the word Lord there in chapter 12 and verse 8. So this is the covenant name of God, Yahweh, and Abram invokes that name, invokes the covenant name of God. He worships this God. Abram will then lie about his wife to save his own skin. When, because of famine, they go into Egypt, and his wife is beautiful, and he knows that someone will want his wife. The Pharaoh will want his wife, or rulers want his wife. They will kill him and take his wife. So instead, he has to tell his wife that his wife is his sister to allow her to be taken by Pharaoh. He does take her, and then all of a sudden God starts cursing him. Then he finds out that this is actually Abram's wife, and then dismisses Abram for lying to him. He charges him that he's lied, but he knows that his God somehow or another is protecting Abram because he was the one cursed for taking the wife. So it's an odd story, but again, it's showing Abram is not always what he's cracked up to be. So in other words, Abram is not the righteous person who always does the good. Here he is, not trusting God's protection, but thinks he has to trust himself, and that's why he lies. So we see a pattern here, or we see activities that's going to show up in Abram's descendants. Some of his descendants will do some of the same kind of deceptive type of things. These deceptions are part of not trusting in God and God's provision. So Abram allots land to his nephew Lot. Of course, this is going to play out in a later storyline where Lot goes to, and Abram is going to have to come to Lot's rescue. But he's given Lot. Again, it shows the pattern of Abram's graciousness. So he gives Lot the opportunity to choose first the land that he wants. And so that's something else that we see with Abram. He can be gracious in aspects, although he can do things that are not in line with kind of God's will or God's keeping. It shows his vulnerability. It shows his maybe his sinfulness. And so Abram is a complicated character. Abram is going to end up rescuing Lot and is going to end up being blessed by a very interesting character, Melchizedek. So this is in chapter 14. So Melchizedek, his name means king of righteousness. We see him as kind of this priest of the Most High. And he is going to end up blessing Abram. And so it is interesting that this priest king in Jerusalem, or right now in Salem, is going to be the one who blesses Abraham. This too kind of foreshadows the significance of Jerusalem as this place. And of course, this name, Melchizedek, for anybody who's familiar with the book of Hebrews, becomes an important name. It is, interestingly, it's also a name that is conjured up in the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a Melchizedek scroll, seeing Melchizedek as this kind of priestly figure. Of course, in the book of Hebrews, the author is going to try and argue for Jesus being a high priest, since Jesus offers himself as a sacrifice. So if Jesus is going to offer a sacrifice to God, he must be a priest, because only priests offer sacrifices. How can Jesus, who is a descendant of, of, David, be a priest when priests are descendants of Levi and Aaron? And so Jesus can't be somebody who offers a sacrifice. So the author of Hebrews then ties Jesus to Melchizedek, who stands as kind of a type of priest that Jesus is. And so here is Melchizedek, who can provide blessings to the descendants of Abraham. And so Jesus is seen as a high priest like Melchizedek, having no beginning, no end, since there's nothing about Melchizedek's birth or death. So Jesus as well has no death. So that's an interesting kind of character in this story, and what role he plays in blessing Abraham. Abram has also asked God for a sign, so he might know that the promise of an heir will come true. And so a sign is kind of given or performed for Abram. So there's this kind of lack of trust again, that you have to ask for a sign from God, that you just can't accept what God claims or reveals, but you're kind of testing God. So that's going to be a problem as well for the Israelites later on, where they want to test God about things. Now, in this particular case, God's willing to give a sign. Later on, God is going to find asking for signs as another indication of a lack of trust, when signs have been already provided. So we're seeing this pattern of behavior that lays for us anticipations of the patterns of behaviors of Abraham's descendants. So, but God is going to make this covenant with Abraham about how he's going to bless him, make him this great nation. So this is in chapter 15, verses 18 through 19, an important passage that lays out this covenant, this arrangement, where Abraham has the opportunity to accept that covenant and abide by the covenant's stipulation. There's going to be more about this covenant that will come later on in the Abraham narratives. And so finally, I'm going to just look here at the renewal covenant with Abraham. So we get a story about Abram and Hagar. So Hagar is a slave who is a maiden to Hagar's wife. And so Sarah gives Hagar, because they have this idea of they're going to have a great nation, but how is Hagar supposed to have children when Sarah is old and past the time of having children? So she gives the slave to Abram to have this child, and maybe this is how it's done. This child is born, is called Ishmael, but then we begin to see problems because Sarah feels that Hagar is looking down upon her because she couldn't produce the child, and she was, and so Sarah feels as if she's lost honor. She is being mistreated because the mother of Abram's child is somebody else. But the thing is that this is not going to be the son of Abraham who is going to perpetuate this covenant relationship. And so there's really just a disturbing story here about the story of harshness, really, of Abram. So, when Sarah's wife doesn't like what Hagar is doing to her, how she feels like Hagar is showing her contempt. She is distraught, but Abram basically gives Sarah permission to do whatever she wants. And so she sends Hagar and this child away. So it's a very disturbing story how this family that is supposed to be the answer to the world's problems is themselves engaged in behavior that are unjust or harsh. So God is having to deal now with a family who, or at least this person, who's not really living up to what he wants. But he's still going to stay committed, even though there is this sinfulness. There's this um, um, lack of trust and faith. They're still acting towards others in ways they ought not to. But God is going to stick with Abram. So the name Abram, which is how he's introduced earlier on when God calls him, just means exalted ancestor. And so we're going to get in chapter 17 of Genesis then another sign of the covenant, this time circumcision. So this is where the mark, as it were, of this is going to be my people. They're the males are going to be circumcised, so the removal of the foreskin on the penis is going to be removed, and this is what this family is going to do. It's a practice that is not unheard of by other peoples or groups within the region, but this is what's going to be used to mark this community. And at the same time, Abram is going to be given a name. He's going to be given the name Abraham, which is ancestor of a multitude. So a slight change. Now, this change of name is a thing we will see in the biblical text oftentimes when some kind of significant relationship is established. And we're going to see this with another descendant of Abraham, his son Jacob, and who's going to have a change of name. So there's this aspect of the covenant that is being marked even after some disappointing behavior, shameful behavior on behalf of Abram and his wife Sarah. So he is promised a son through Sarah. So Ishmael is not the son, and it's not going to be one of your other servants. It's not going to be Lot. It's not going to be one of these. Sarah is the one who's going to have it. Now, Abraham and Sarah both laugh at this idea because they are, past the age of bearing children, so they assume or think. But because they laugh at God, this child is going to be called Isaac. So, as a reminder of your lack of trust in God and what God can do, what may seem impossible is not impossible for God. So the child's name then is going to be used as a reminder of a lack of trust. So Abram will then, next story that kind of shows Abraham's character is he's going to find out that Sodom and Gomorrah, these cities, are going to be destroyed. These are cities that now are associated with his nephew Lot, and that they're going to be destroyed. And of course, Abram knows that there's Lot there, but he's concerned about these cities, and he intercedes on them. There's this little kind of account where he keeps bargaining with God how many righteous people have to be in the city in order for the city to be saved. First of all, there's 50, but Abraham whittles God down to 10. And so God says, all right, sure, if there's 10 people, I won't destroy the city. Which again kind of reflects something of God's economy in dealing with wickedness in the city. That is, a wickedness in the world. If there is enough righteous people, God spares the city from destruction. So as long as there's enough righteous people, then God is gracious towards the wicked. But when there can't be enough righteous, then God is going to destroy them. And so that's what's going to happen with Sodom and Gomorrah. He will end up punishing these cities. There's also a very disturbing story, another disturbing story now about oppressing the foreigner, because when some angels come to visit Lot, and Lot takes them in and wants to show them hospitality and wants to protect them. There are people in the city who want to do harm to these strangers, these foreigners, and they also even treat Lot as a stranger or foreigner, as an alien. Lot tries to intercede in this story that is really would bewilder modern readers about why he would do this, but tries to protect the honor of his guest, which the inhabitants of the city are not going to tolerate. But these angels are able to cast blindness upon the people who seek to harm them, to abuse them, and to shame them. And so then the angels warn Lot and his family, get out of town because this city is so corrupt. They don't even care for the alien, the foreigners in their midst, and so you need to leave. And so, though Abraham tried to intercede for them, that intercession was not granted because the wickedness was too great. So we're seeing in these chapters. So we get up to chapter 19 now in Genesis, and we begin to see something of this character of Abraham, which is going to be characteristics that are replayed by descendants. It is a complicated story of both grace as well as lack of faithfulness. But despite the lack of faithfulness, God is still going to stay committed to this people as it seeks to impact the rest of the world and the other nations for good. So we will stop this quick review then of these first few chapters in the Abraham narrative.